What's up, guys? Today I got a request from Wraith to play the E50M. Before I get into the rest of the video, I just want to thank everybody that's subscribed so far. We're at 60 subscribers, and it means a lot to me that you guys actually enjoy this. So I just want to throw that out there that I appreciate everybody that's done that so far, and I'll keep making content for you guys to enjoy. Now back to the E50M. We've got some clips in the background here, and you'll notice in all these clips it's me missing a shot, or in this case I hit the shot but then landing a ram, and that's what this tank is all about. It's all about the close in face hugs and ramming and all that. This tank weighs 50 tons and goes 55 kilometers an hour on average, so if you run into things you do a lot of damage. That's what it's all about. You also have like the most toxic medium tank armor profile in tier 10, so you do keep that in mind. It's a really strong armor profile, especially when you're hold down, you're using all 7 degrees of the gun depression. The only thing that'll pen you is like heavy tanks and tank destroyers in the cheeks of the turret. Now that being said, the only time this tank really excels for me in my playstyle is when I'm actually face hugging somebody. Any other time, I guess it's alright hold down, but any other time that I'm not face hugging somebody, this tank is just not being played to its advantage, and that's because it trades off the gun handling statistics and DPM for this insane hold down armor profile. And if I wanted something that was really good hold down, I would just play an M48 Patton, an STB1, even an M60 over this. There's just better tanks for hold down. There's also the T62A, which in my opinion is just as good as brawling as this tank. So there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not you should play this tank, and we'll get to that by the end of the video of whether or not this tank is actually worth playing. We will go over stats too, because whether or not I think it's worth playing is just my opinion. I'm going to throw the stats out there so you guys can make a decision for yourself and you can watch some gameplay. Before we go over stats, I'm just going to show the armor profile of the T62A, which I think is the most competitive brawler in the game. I think it's a little bit better than this because of its versatility. And then we're going to look at the M48 Patton, because the M48's more of an all-rounder than the STB1, but is still very good hold down. And both of those screenshots went AP and then heat of the same angle. And now this is a more realistic position you would see in game. This is AP. And then here is heat. Those were all from the E50M running gun rammer, not calibrated shells. Now switching to a face hug, this is AP from the E50M. Face hugs where the E50M is supposed to excel. Here's heat, and as you can see, the M48 does have a hatch on it, which you can pen with both AP and heat, but so does the E50. Here's the T62A. This is AP from the E50M, and here's heat from the E50M. You can see the cheeks become pennable. You can wiggle to get away with that if you're playing the T62A. Here's the perspective of the M48. This guy is running gun rammer. In the face hug, you can see what he can look at. Here is heat, and then coming up here we have the perspective of the T62A running calibrated shell. So here's your AP, and you can see this T62A, here's the heat, sits much lower down on the E50 than the M48 does. Now that you've seen the armor profiles, you know what the advantage of the tank is. The tank in its best peak performance role is when you're in that face hug against a medium tank, or your hold down against a medium tank. It does better in a face hug though, because for me the gun is unreliable when you're turning the turret and when you're traversing the hull, which is something you're doing a lot with this tank. So basically, if you're not in a face hug, you're not using this tank to its full potential, and I kind of have a problem with that because it's such a niche role. It's not a very good all-rounder, and I find that I am in situations where I'd be better off playing just about any other tier 10 medium, except for the beginning of the game when I'm in a medium tank brawl, and because of that I didn't have very enjoyable games in this tank. And you can see from the stats that when you're not using that face hug potential, you have a tank that has a gun that's worse in every other stat except for final accuracy, and that's only the accuracy when you're fully aimed in. And as you can see, the other two tanks in this comparison have better dispersion when they're moving the turret, and when they're traversing the hull. So the chances of you actually getting that dispersion are quite low because you have to sit still for 1.5 seconds and aim in. When do you get the chance to do that? When you're in a brawl. And you can see in the mobility stats, you also don't really gain much there. The T62A is just straight up faster than you. The M48, when it boils down to it, is kind of the same speed. I find the M48 feels slower in a straight line, which is true according to the stats, but it has a better traverse speed, so you do gain back some rotational potential that you lose in the straight line speed. All this just brings me back to my point of this is a mediocre tank when you're not using it in its specific role of face hugging in a brawl. There's tanks that can go hold down better than this one can. There's tanks that can run around the map and create crossfires better than this one can. And there's tanks that are just as good at face hugging, which if you have to say it's just as good, usually it's not, but I think that can be said about the T62A. There's just not much of an advantage you gain from playing this tank in the majority of situations. It's so role focused on something that happens like maybe once every couple games that it's just not worth playing this tank over these two close examples or really any other medium tank. Before we move on to the gameplay, I did 4 sessions on this tank over the span of a couple days, and there was 2 of these days where one game was from another tank, but that's kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of these stats. I ended up doing all right, but it's with the amount of games I played here, I think it's 52 E50M games total. I did not get one outstanding game. I had one 6,000 damage game today that was literally all farm, and I would have gotten more damage if I played any other tier 10 medium tank just because of the trade-offs this has for its armor that I didn't need in that game. There's just so many situations where I'd be so much better served in any other tank. So I'm kind of giving up on this because I have some games I got a lot of 4,000 damage games that were like all right, that weren't phenomenal. I just don't feel like I'm going to get an insane game in this tank because there's so few situations where it does really well. Alright, let's look at some gameplay. And no, I'm not going to be showing the 6,000 damage game. That's simply because nothing that I did was something that anyone else couldn't do, and nothing that I did was something that any other tank couldn't do, so it's just not a good replay for E50M specific video. This replay, though, does have Hold Down Hero in it, who at my beginning of my YouTube videos commented on every single one, so it's funny to finally see him in game, so I'm glad he could be featured in this video finally. In this replay, me and this M48 are going to try to hold down medium side here. We both have very strong turrets, as you saw in the intro, with 8 degrees of gun depression. So when these guys start rushing us, if we play our cards right, we'll be able to hold them back pretty easily. Right where that Progetto is and where that WZ is not a great spot to be, especially if there's tank destroyers, which there always is on this map. You're going to get absolutely slapped from the rails if you go into that spot right there. As you can see, he just took 1,000 damage, and he's pretty much dead now. Oh, he is dead. Don't push into that if you're spotted and you don't know where the tank destroyers are. It's a very bad idea. But fortunately, that guy died right in a spot that I can go hold down on and push down this Progetto 65 and their M48. The Progetto caught himself out here. There's nothing he can do, and the M48 is just going to fall because we have a numbers advantage. So that's that medium side brawl done. And as you can see, I was kind of visible to the 183 there, but as long as you stick to, from my perspective, the left side, once you pass halfway over the medium side, you should be okay. Just know that there's still a chance that you're going to get hit, and you have to keep in mind that some angles you can be seen from the far corner tank destroyer spot too. Now that the mediums are out of the way, I'm going to control the mid-ridge here so that the 183 can't drop down into the bowl and be safe. He's going to be pressured from his rails, and in the middle, there's nowhere for him to go now. I'm taking a risk of getting spotted and getting shot by the Yagpens or E100. I also don't really care because I'm full HP pretty much. It's a 6v4 now. It would also just tell me where he is, which is honestly just as important as having 800 more hit points. When he does get spotted, he's not even looking at me, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway. And since he's looking 90 degrees away from me, I get a free pen on his side armor. And you can see in this replay here, at the beginning, yeah, it was kind of effective. It did have good armor, but I didn't do anything that I couldn't have done in an M48, in an SDB1, in a WZ121 for that matter. Nothing that I did in this tank could not have been done in one of those other tanks. And then when it gets to this part in the game, there's so many other tanks that I'd rather be in to get more farming damage off or to create crossfires better. In conclusion, I personally dislike this tank because it's a really good all-rounder, but it doesn't have one trait other than the brawling that it's really good at, and I'm not going to be using the brawling for the majority of my games, so it doesn't have any traits that I can rely on to farm damage or win games super easily. This doesn't make it a bad tank by any means. I think it's a really good tank for especially beginners because you get 8 degrees of gun depression, you get solid armor, you get good, like pretty much every stat. You don't excel at anything, but you're never going to find yourself in a situation where you're just like, oh, this tank can't succeed here. And there's always the fallback plan of just face hug them, and it's going to be really hard for them to pen you, which is kind of an instinct for especially new players when you're getting shot at and you're about to die. It works so well in this tank. There was a clip at the beginning against the Leopard 1 on Castilla. I just face hugged him, and then all of a sudden he couldn't pen me. That's just what this tank is good at. And unless you're facing a really good player, if you're in a situation where you're about to die and you need to do something, you just face hug them and you win. It's a great tank for a new player. One thing that is worth noting though is this thing is super fun to ram people in. So if you ever get a situation where you can ram somebody and you're in this tank, it's pretty satisfying to do like 450 damage to somebody in a ram. So if that ever comes up, it's fun, but it's so few and far between, like the brawling thing. It's kind of not worth playing the tank just for that. Really, you're going to consistently do well in this tank. You're going to consistently win games and get good damage, but it's going to be harder for you to get those outstandingly good games that you would get in something like a Leopard 1 or a Bat Chat. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Hopefully you learned something about the E50M if you were looking at getting it next. I hope I didn't scare anybody away from it too bad because it doesn't suck. It's just not for me. But with that being said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Check out the Discord link in the description if you're interested. And thanks for watching to the end. I appreciate you guys.